Welcome dear students. Today we will discuss on the history of press in India. In this lesson, I will cover the history of press in India in pre-independence, press in the East India Company rule, British rule, what is the first newspaper, eminent journalist, and what is the progress post-independence, about the press commissions and the national emergency we have. So, what is the condition, status in the national emergency, post liberalization policy, that is 1991, after how the journalism is emerged in the Indian context. Now, let us look about the newspaper, how it is came to the India. The newspaper came to the India as a alien product, as one of the benefits of British rule. In the early years, it was considered to the subserved the interest of the ruling race, and its subject people had very little to do within, and not for the every long time. So, this is the newspapers, they work for the ruling British India. East India Company, which was ruling the country, was not favorably disposed to the press, and its officials were from the beginning they suspicious on journalists and the newspapers. They don't tolerate the criticism on the ruling, means the company rule. But the press at home, means that is in the England, was gained in a power and influence with the strong public opinion behind it, and it could not very well be stopped for functioning in India, which was a dependency. The press in India, controlled by Englishmen, drew its strength from the power of the press in England. The press in India, controlled by various rulers, means the then officials, means governors, governor generals, viceroys, that is the power is in their control only. Here we need to know, we need to recall, we need to remember the main person, who is James Augustus Hickey. He was launched the first newspaper in India. This is the history of newspapers of a modern India. That is a modern Indian newspaper. Press in the India in a pre-independence era, there is a 5 stages. The preparatory phase, that is between the year 1780 to 1818. In this phase, it constitutes some kind of prehistory, a preparatory phase. In this area only, we know we have a first newspaper, that is started by James Augustus Hickey. Stage 1, in the stage 1, from the year 1818 to 1868, this is inaugurated by Buckingham and includes the inspiring efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Rai. He struggles against the censorship, harassment, deportation and prosecution. The struggle to establish some measure of the freedom of expression, the dilemmas of colonial rulers. Coming to the stage 2, that is between the 1868 to 1919, this stage witnessed the rise of the Indian press as a part of the nationalist and anti-imperialist struggle, and the expression of two lines or two tendencies in the press. Now discuss about the stage 3. This is between the 1919 to 1937. In this stage, the differentiation of the Indian press into moderate and radical tendencies in relation to the strategy and tactics of the freedom movement. Stage 4 is between 1937 to 1947, that is before independence. In this stage, we see the maturing of assertive tendencies in the press and significant professional developments such as news services, the pooling of arrangements and the expand coverage of foreign news. Here we need to know about the press in India in East India Company rule. The restriction on the press and the deportation of unwanted journalists did not go without protest from some careful Englishmen, some of whom were officials of the East India Company. Among them, we need to recall here some persons like Sir Charles Forbes, who had served in Bombay, and he was reputed to have borrowed money from Indians to finance Sir Arthur Wellesley Maratha wars. Colonel Robinson of the 24th Infantry Regiment, who wrote to a Kolkata journal in 1822 protesting against the curbs on the press, was cashiered. In the other provinces like in Bombay in 1823, there was a peculiar situations of a member of the Governor's Council, who is Francis Warden. He owning two newspapers, the Bombay Gazette and another one is the Bombay Courier. When one of these paper criticized the judiciary, a controversy was provoked. So early stage there is a Englishman who are against the then East India Company rule and British rule. Here we need to know about the first newspaper in India. The first newspaper in India was started by James Augustus Hickey. The name of the title is Bengal Gazette. There is also another name, Calcutta General Advertiser. This newspaper came out on January 29, 1780 in Calcutta. The Bengal Gazette was the forerunner of many journals and newspapers which appeared in Calcutta, the birthplace of journalism in India. Of course, we know this newspaper only runs 2 years. Later, it is seized by the then government officials, means the British rulers. In other presidencies like Madras, Bombay, there is also number of newspapers came out in the period of this era in 1780s and between 18th century. In Madras, the Madras Courier was officially recognized and owned by the government printer, came out as a weekly in 1785, followed in 1793 by Hurkuru, edited by the editor name is Boyd. The Hurkuru ceased publication after a year. The Indian Herald, an unauthorized newspaper, which had a brief existence, was notable for libels against the government and the princes. Libels means we know there is a various types of defamations like libel, slander. One kind of a defamation is a libel. In the Bombay Presidency, there was no newspaper in Bombay until 1789 when the Bombay Herald was started. It merged into the Bombay Gazette in 1791 and became an official publication. The Courier was another paper to make its appearance in 1789, and it has the distinction of carrying advertisements in Gujarati language to serve an Indian readership. Here we need to know some other important journalists who are actually they were from the England. They were Englishmen, but they worked for the Indian society, Indian newspaper industry. James Silk Buckingham in 1818 as the editor of the Calcutta Chronicle. He was a stout champion of the freedom of press. He held views which could be called revolutionary in the background of prevailing nations about the press. Another notable journalist is Raja Ram Mohan Rai. Raja Ram Mohan Rai was born in 1772. He was the socialist, he was a reformer, and he is a good journalist in Indian history. The Raja Ram Mohan Rai has been described by Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister, as a founder of the Indian press. He founded the Sambandh Kaumudi, that meaning is moon of the intelligence, in the year 1821 in Calcutta. Let us look about the role of the press in freedom struggle. The Indian newspapers became highly critical of Lord Lytton's administration, especially regarding its inhuman treatment to victims of the famine which is happened between the year 1876 and 1877. The government struck back with the Vernacular Press Act, which is imposed in the year 1878. Vernacular Press Act, it was formulated to better control the vernacular press, means the language newspapers all around the Indian continent. There is a various newspapers from the various provinces like Bombay, Madras, Kolkata. So they need to stop the freedom of the press. So there was introduced the Vernacular Press Act. In the same time, the British government, they always not given any freedom to the then press in the India. There is a number of acts which curbs the press in British rule. Among them, the important one is Censorship of the Press Act, which is introduced in the year 1799. Another one is Licensing Regulations, which is introduced in the year 1823. Press Act of 1835, generally we call it is a Metcalfe Act. So this is a crucial act which curbs the press. Another act, that is Licensing Act, which was introduced in the year 1857. Another act is in the line of this curb of press, that is Registration Act, which is introduced in the year 1867. Already we have discussed about the Vernacular Act, which was introduced in the year 1878. Another major Act, that is a Newspaper Incitement to Offences Act. This was introduced in the year 1908. Another act, that is Indian Press Act 1910. Among these acts, various circulations, various notices, circulars, time to time circulars released by the then viceroys of the presidencies in the Bombay, Madras, Kolkata. In the history of press, some important and major newspapers were established during the 19th century. The Amrit Bazar Patrika, this is one of the oldest Indian owned daily, which was started in the year 1920. Another important newspaper is The Hindu. 6 young men, all in their 20s, founded The Hindu in Madras on September 20, 1878. Another major newspaper, that is Times of India. Robert Knight became editor of the Bombay Times, and by merging in that Bombay Times 2 other newspapers and renamed as a Times of India in 1861. The first issue of the Bombay Times, that is a bi-weekly, appeared on November 3, 1838. Another important newspaper is The Statesman. Robert Knight, already we known about him, who founded The Statesman in the year 1875. Another important newspaper, The Tribune. The Tribune was started as a weekly in Lahore in the year 1818 by Sardar Dayal Singh Majitiya, who was the great admirer of Raja Ram Mohan Rai and the Brahmo Samaj. Here we need to know about the important journalists like Bala Gangadhar Tilak, Annie Besant, Mahatma Gandhi. One by one we will discuss in detail. Very first, the Bala Gangadhar Tilak. Tilak beginning is a press, is a journalism profession in the 20th century. The beginning of the 20th century was marked by fierce repression by the Allied rulers and prosecution of the Indian press. Here Allied rulers means British rulers and the princely states also. Especially the language press. In the wake of the anti-partition agitation of the Bengal state and the Swadeshi movement, which spread all the parts of the country, Tilak, who is the center of the activity. The center of activity shifted to Maharashtra, where a new revolutionary leader was born. He is the Tilak. Tilak began his journalism career when he and his associates started the Kesari in the Marathi language, the Maratha in the English language in January 1881. It was announced that the Kesari would deal with the political and economical development in the country, and also it covers world events also. It would write objectively and impartially, and truth would be its watchword. First editorial in the Kesari compared newspapers to night watchmen and said their responsibility was to keep executive officer in wholesome fear of public opinion. It declared its intention of improving social conditions by frankly telling the people what was bad and harmful. The Tilak's, in his hands there is two successful journals. One is Kesari, another one is Maratha. But the Kesari became by the end of 1882 the largest circulated language paper in the country, and Maratha was acknowledged as the leading mouthpiece of Indian political thinking in Western India. Tilak himself became the victim of the panic of the rulers. He was prosecuted for 2 articles appearing in Kesari, and he sentenced to 6-year rigorous imprisonment on July 22, year 1908 by an Indian judge. The action had been taken under the Indian newspapers Incitement to Offence Act, which was passed in that year, and which gave wide power to the government to proceed against the seditious writings. Another important journalist is Annie Besant. She had worked in England on the staff of the journal National Reformer. This is one kind of a newspaper in England. She acquired a daily newspaper, the Madras Standard, and run it as a New India, means it is renamed as a New India from in the year 1914, in addition to a weekly, that is the Commonweal. The Commonweal is a news weekly. Though these publications and from the public platforms, she advocated a political line that was bold in comparison with that of the Indian Congress leadership. She had the courage to write in a New India in the year 1917, 2nd March. During the First World, young men cannot be expected to make the sacrifice asked for unless they are inspired by a passionate love for their motherland, such as emptied the universities of Great Britain. The newspapers bought out by Annie Besant served as Tanguturi Prakasham's English daily, that is Swarajya. Also from Madras was to do later as a seedbed that nurtured many journalists who later attained high distinctions. Another important journalist in Indian history, that is Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi's journey in journalism started quite early in his life when he contributed 9 articles on Indian diet, customs and festivals in a magazine that is called Vegetarian. The magazine name is Vegetarian in London. When on arrival in London in September 1888 to study the course law, Gandhiji at the age of 19 for the first time realized how actively he would be associated with the newspaper for the rest of his life. Gandhiji consistently wrote for the next 6 decades. The Indian Opinion was the first journalistic tool of Gandhi that was unveiled on June 4, 1903 in South Africa. It was a weekly newspaper and was published in English, Gujarati, Tamil and Hindi for the benefit of Indian residents in the South Africa. Gandhiji, after returning finally to India, Gandhiji conducted 3 journals, that is number 1 is Navajivan as a weekly in Gujarati with occasional bi-weekly issues. Another newspaper is Young India in English language, initially as a bi-weekly and later as a weekly. Another important newspaper is Arijan as a weekly in English language from 1933 with some interruptions till his martyrdom in 1948. Gandhiji took over Young India in the year 1919 from Jamdas Dwarkadas of Bombay and also started a Gujarati weekly, that is Navajivan. Gandhiji described the objectives of a newspaper in these words. Post independence, we have many press commissions, and we have and in the emergency, and another important issue is liberation in a new industrial policy in the year 1991. In the post independence, the era, that is the press, enjoyed a large measure of freedom, because the then Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a liberal who realized that for the successful functioning of democratic setup, the freedom of the press was absolutely necessary. The press and national emergency, we already known about how liberal the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, but later the daughter of the Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, in the year 1975 imposed emergency. There was a ragging controversy. There was whether Indira Gandhi was justified in imposing the emergency, but there was universal condemnation of the muzzing of the press and the drastic action taken against some newspapers. Another important point in the history of press in India is liberation policy. The beginning of the last decade of the 20th century entered an era of economic liberalization in India under the co-authorship of the then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and the then Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. After that, there is two press commissions. Post independence, we have two press commissions. One first press commission, which is led by the Raja Diksha, and the second press commission, which is led by the K.K. Matthew. They were given many recommendations to the Indian press. So as per the recommendations by the press commissions, the Press Council of India was established in the year 1978. Thank you very much, dear students, for the listening this video lesson.